So when we turn a light on, when we say get on with it, get a move on, we're saying get light on it. On literally means the light. So Solomon is nothing but the sun. There's no biographical character. You're not going to find him. You're not going to dig him up. He doesn't exist. Saul Amon, like Jesus Christ, is the sun. And everything that you're reading about that Solomon is getting involved in is not a biography of a man, but a mythology of a sun. Same thing for Hercules and many of the other gods of the ancient world. Now the name that is given to Jesus Christ at his birth is Emmanuel. But that is the same thing. That comes from Omonael. Om, on, and El. They don't even hide it. The Renaissance artists drew on this canon. Above the cross of Jesus, you have the sun and the moon. Pagan motifs. The INRI that is above his head just represents in Latin, or in Hebrew by the way, the letters of the elements. I am, Rurik, Ibishah, and one other. These are the 4 names of the elements. Fire, water, air, and earth. The beginning letters are INRI. Now Jesus is identified with the sun when you see him with a crown of thorns. The ancients understood that the sun had a crown of thorns, and that when you turn the thorns in, you make a crown. Kings would have their crowns. Jesus would have his crown of thorns. The symbolism is enough to put us onto the right track if we become sane and understand what we're seeing here. And again, the origin of a lot of it is Egypt, not just the 18th dynasty of Akhenaton, but many ages before that. Here we have Ra, Horus, the sun god, with a solar disk above his head. Now Mustafa Gadala has shown, the great Egyptian scholar, has shown that Jesus Christ, I mean, we've been saying all along in this show that he is not a historical or biographical character, but an interesting adjunct to this is that Mustafa Gadala, the Egyptian historian, has shown that there is an approximation of Jesus the Christ. He most clearly resembles the pharaonic dynasty from the 18th dynasty of Egypt. That is Akhenaton and his son, the Tutankhamun. If you read this man's magnificent work, you're going to see that even though 3,000 years elapsed, when the Hebrews in Rome were thinking about who to pattern their hero on, they thought of Simon Magus, yes. They thought of Judas Crestus, yes. But they also thought of Akhenaton, the old pharaoh, and his dynasty and the cult of the sun. The first monotheistic cult of Egypt is what they patterned their modern Jesus Christ on. Fascinating work. Now in the Vajra Sanyahi Samhita, we read that the Brahman, that's their god, Brahman, is the light of the sun. And in Hebrew, they took the Brahman and made it Abraham. Abraham, you just change the letter around, becomes the Brahman. And Brahman's consort was Saraswati. Well, wasn't Abraham's consort Sarah? But remember, they don't exist. Brahman is the sun. In the Atharva Veda, we read a passage that says, the sun set in motion by the gods shines unsurpassed yonder. From it came the Brahma power, the supreme Brahman, all of the gods, and what makes them immortal. So the ancient Vedic texts also had personified deities like Krishna and Arjuna and Vishnu and Brahma, but they were under no doubt about it, that they were just personifications of the sun. Just analogies, just simulacras. In the Shatapatha Brahmana, we read that first was Brahman born in the east. From the horizon, the gracious one appears in splendor. He illumines the forms of this world, the deepest, the highest. He is the cradle of what is and what is not. Father of the luminaries, begetter of the treasure, he entered many-formed into the spaces of the air. They glorify him with hymns of praise, making the youth that is Brahman increased by Brahman. Brahman brought forth the gods, Brahman created the world. Nothing more than solar cult. In fact, in the Temple of Solomon, the old Jewish rabbis would wait until the spring equinox, the Passover, and then would go to the eastern door to blow their ram's horn. The ram's horn, of course, relates to Aries. And they go to the eastern door because they were worshipping the rising of the sun at the east, To this day, the Islamic people will bow towards the east, reverencing Mecca, but really reverencing the eastern horizon, the sunrise. The Manichaeans, a 3rd century Christian sect, we have a statement from them. The Christ or the Christ is the glorious intelligence, which the Persians called Mithras. His residence is the sun. Now the word Christ means the anointed. Anointing was the ancient custom throughout the East by pouring aromatic oils on persons as a token of honor. It was also employed in consecrating the priest, prophets, and kinds, and the places and instruments appointed for worship. That's the New American Encyclopedia, talking about the Christ. In ancient Palestine tradition, it would seem kings, political and military chiefs, village heads, and in fact any claimants to high office were anointed, and thence called the anointed ones. Some, after anointing, then became called the Lord. Very applicable to anyone who held office in the ancient world. The pharaohs were always anointed. Today you can go to the east and see the lingam of Shiva being anointed with holy oil by the women, and also anointed with milk. Tony Bushby says, Origen, Epiphanes, and Julius the emperor all clearly reveal that the John the Baptist, Judas, and Jesus' cousin was the Christ figure, but made no reference to Jesus himself attaining that status. Bishop Theodoret, writing in the 5th century, provided further confirmation that Jesus was not one of the Christ personalities, although many others of his time were. The son of Poseidon, the Medus, was called the Christ, and the priests of Apollo were known as the Christus. In fact, the word Christo and its derivations all appeared in every ancient religious system and showed the original Christo concept was believed to be the personal and invisible mediator and guide between God and everything spiritual in man. The Christ concept has been in ancient religious tradition continually suppressed by the Catholic Church through the centuries. Jordan Maxwell pointed out once that the company Crisco oil, why are they calling their product that? Because they know what we don't know, is that the old word Christ meant the anointing with oil. It's just as simple as that. Now, according to Bishop Epiphanes, the Christ is the spiritual self within each person. There finally the truth. Bishop Epiphanes has it down. We understand that the whole thing is an external carnival facsimile simulacra of man's inner religion, his own inner God, the temple within, as Jesus Christ was saying. Man is his own God, man is his own initiator and salvation. But you want to take that away from man and make it external. Now, the personality of Jesus Christ, as known to modern Christians, is based on several messianic rebel figures of the Holy Land, but particularly on Simon Magus, Judas the Galilean, Yeshua ben Panthera, none of whom had anything to do with literally being from God. The Semitic sect, known as the Essenes, anointed their leaders, who were known henceforth as the Star. The older nephew of Jesus, John the Baptist, and his twin brother Judas were anointed rulers of the Essenes. Their particular order was at Bethlehem, where he and they were reported to have been born. And the astrological references in this are very clear. But let us turn now to something more sane. What is the message and the myth and the man? We have this incredible story. What can really be gleaned from it? We've understood all its distortions. We've understood something about its origins. But can anything be gleaned from this? Or must the whole thing be cast aside? Are we meant to be atheists and skeptics and just learn how to debunk and rebut? Or perhaps can any fool do that? Perhaps it's easy to take away, but the art is in that we have to replace something of equal beauty or greater beauty and more pristine for that which we take away. That is an act of construction. Deconstruction is very important. In fact, it's an essential part of spiritual growth, to be able to deconstruct and let go and have a catabolic action to our development. But then, once we've done that, the time comes to salvage and to develop and to plant new seeds and to gain new wisdom. We've understood that the Bible is the story of the Son, S-U-N, and the Son of God, who personified it. For good or for bad, or both, the archetype and stereotype have long since become intimately fused. The greatest story ever told has empowered but also disempowered the populace, has enraptured but also perplexed the human mind. The story's ending is not especially happy, but it is not conspicuously sad either. It banishes futility just as easily as it can evoke it. We may question the historicity of Jesus, but we cannot question the relevance of the sun and its mythic and symbolic significance. It is not that Christ is the light, but that the light is the Christ. Horus and Set, Christ and Satan, are but the phenomena we call light and dark, expressing themselves physically and psychologically. It is the light that will be with us until the end of the world, and not a man. As we have seen, the Bible is a story about light, and not a man. It therefore constitutes a scientific as well as a religious epic. Now, Christians, for a variety of reasons we do not need to explore here, are likely to remain adamant in their belief in the physical Christ. And, as in the case of Robin Hood or Sherlock Holmes or Santa Claus, there is no reason why they should change their conviction and identification. The loss would be too great for any gain. And too many great truths have been based on this greatest of lies for it to be so roughly uprooted. Whether they realize it or not, the Christian is, even in his ignorance, closer to the ultimate truth than both the scientist, the cynic, or atheist. Because man is light, and light is man. The universe and the human are expressions of the same mystery. Man and world, or man and universe, are one thing, being viewed from two perspectives by the ego. The conviction of the Christian believer needs only to be widened to embrace truths which are equally as valid and enlightening to the heart and mind. The story of the man Christ ends at Calvary. A great man betrayed by a friend, arrested and dragged through the streets. He's mocked, he's cursed by society and condemned by the state. He is totally alone. The man who was so maligned receives our empathy. He doesn't have to be a god, he's a man, and he receives our empathy because he is us. His story exemplifies the life we all live. It is divine because it is so human. For me, personally, the entire story centers not around all the miracles and thunders and lightnings and all the other paraphernalia. It's at Gethsemane, of the healer of the world, the Son of God, the embodiment of truth, mercy, harmony, and light and love, watching his beloved, his friend, come up the garden path with an army of betrayers and deceivers and betray him with a gentle kiss. For me, that is the center of the myth. That is the message. And it's something that can visit all the teachers of light. In that is the poignancy. In that is the true story. In that is the poignancy. And it seems that so many in their movies and in their analysis seem to bypass that and favor so much of the other metaphysical, supernatural aspects. Weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and your children, says Christ in Luke 23. Of course, because you are I. What I go through, you will go through. How can we forget that in the last days of the man's so-called existence, at the Last Supper, he's telling Peter, the man whom he would later give the keys to create what we know as the Catholic Church, the foundation, Petra, the rock upon which my church will stand. But Peter's busy denying him 3 times later on that same night. Judas, his own cousin, some of the scriptures are saying, for 30 pieces of silver, betraying the Son of God, betraying his brother, betraying his enlightener. The scene at Calvary, the tragedy of a great man being hung between 2 thieves in front of his betrayers, is so inherently emotive and so patently human in tone that we often forget to understand how our emotional empathy occludes its greater existential meaning. The man whose life brings him to such a seemingly pathetic fate is not in pain at the end. He is neither regretful or alone. He is not suffering the needs no one and needs no one's help. He has arrived at this place because it is the inevitable end of the life he has hitherto been leading. So the mystery of this Christ is that if you want to live as an authentic man, if you want to live a moral way, if you want to be a mediator for the divine to the earth, you better realize you're going to have to deal with aloneness, loneliness, betrayal, and the rest of it. But the difference is the authentic man knows that ahead of time. The authentic man understands that the cup he will have to have put in front of him. But he's okay with it. He is not in lament. Our emotions should be, quite rightly, horrified by all of this, but he is walking the road that he is meant to walk. Now the ending is formidably tragic only for us, the witnesses, the spectators who, for a second, get to see an event which encapsulated the life and existential ardor of an authentic man. And I mean that in the full Germanic philosophical sense. It is we, not he, who balk at the futility and recoil at its insanity. He is present and is as accepting of his fate as were the Cathars of Montsegur, who walked on their own feet into the flames of the bonfires lit by their enemies, as those who rode with Crazy Horse on the plains of America. In that 1 minute of life before their death, such men were already living a deeper and greater life than most achieved during the long years allotted to them. When we read Christ saying in Luke 23, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," could we perhaps take the liberty and say that he really meant, "Father, forgive them, for they know not how they live"? When you're not living in an authentic way, you inherit the perdition of the worlds. And in my other work, I talk about the fact that, again, not only does Christ represent the Son, but he also represents the concept of the self-initiator, and the fact that we have an inner zodiac, as Carl Jung said. As we all know, science began with the stars, and mankind discovered in them the dominance of the unconscious, the gods, as well as the curious psychological qualities of the zodiac, a complete projected theory of human character. That's right, an inner zodiac. In divination and the goddess tradition, we go into that thoroughly, that the idea of Christ with 12 disciples is a whole other dimension to this story. The fact that we're an inner zodiac. We carry that template around with us. We are the walking temple of God. And as we return full circle to the 21st and 22nd century, to the time of solutions, we understand that through the divination arts, through astrology, through the tarot, these are our means of initiating ourselves back into our sovereignhood, back into our own Godhead. As the Egyptians knew, though, the day is coming, says Aesculapius, when the world will know nothing of the faith of the Egyptians. Our land will stand desolate, tombs and the dead will be its only witnesses. O Egypt, nothing but fables will tell of thy faith, and no posterity will believe them. How right he was. We would be in a time when all of these connections would be forgotten. The Egyptians talked of the inner zodiac, that man was his own light unto himself. Richard Tharnas, PhD, says that psychology textbooks of future generations will look back on the modern psychologists working without the aid of astrology as being like the medieval astronomers working without the aid of the telescope. And through the divination sciences, hopefully there will be a sea change and we'll understand the importance of working with these divination arts, because they were they not, the bequeathment from the stellar cult and the lunar cult of old. They're one of the most important oracles that we can use. Once they're used correctly, once they're used appropriately and with love and reverence, once we understand their innate laws and work with them properly and sanely, not just to bolster our egos and solve our little domestic disputes, but to understand them also as rites of passage, as barometers and as compass points to help us navigate the seas of time and the sea of karma and the sea of fate. Then we can reinitiate ourselves into what? Into what the Egyptians had long ago been teaching us, that man is his own priest and woman her own priestess. When tutored aright, when we understand what our fate and our destiny is, then we understand we need no intermediary. We don't need to look to any edifice, and we'll understand what horrors the world has suffered because we have actually done that. We've disassociated ourselves from our own power, and we've reaped the wind as a result. When man realizes that he was, as the humanists and the Renaissance masters understood, Adam Kadmon, the anthropos, the center of the universe, when he is in harmony, when he works on himself and balances his own republic, when his own city-state of intellect and emotions and biology, his inner house, his inner temple is in harmony, then perhaps, at that point, We can have, like the Druids of old and the Arthurian knights of old, we can have the perfect political state, the perfect unison socially. But mystics, Gnostics, I would be amiss if I sat here and said that social cohesion and political harmony could ever come into being in this world at any time if the inner state of man was in chaos. This is simply not the case. In Acts 7, we read, "The Most High dwells not in temples made with hands." In 1 Corinthians, "You are the temple of God, for the temple of God is holy, which temple you are." In John 14, "The works I do, you can do, and greater." Well, why are we not being told this by the clergy who are meant to represent this Christ, this force? If he is telling his disciples, "What I can do, you can do also, and more." How come we then are kept on our knees in front of church and in front of state? How come we're not being instructed in our own power, our own independence, our own individuality? In this program, we hope to have shown you some of the reasons why, and also what to do about it. As Plato said, perhaps there is a pattern set up in the heavens for one who desires to see it, and having seen it, to find one in himself. We have seen this new millennia open as so many before, with war and bloodshed, mass fear, confusion, and needless mortality. As long as we tolerate psychotics and megalomaniacs to govern a herd of sheep-like automatons and ride roughshod over our sovereign rights, we can hardly expect anything else. As our materialistic and hyper-driven technocratic age rises to its critical mass, and as the nightmares of Orwell, Kafka, and the Marquis de Sade combine to become realities in the policies of despotic presidents and leaders, we may find it beneficial to pay attention to what the competent prophets and seers of today are saying. For though they may have their heads in the clouds, their heads are safer and saner than those in the mud. As Oscar Wilde said, "We are all in the gutter, but some are staring up at the stars. Some that stare for long enough do not see the gutter any longer, only the miracles and beauty that permeate all creation. The fragrance of a rose is special, and so is the fragrance of truth. But the greatest fragrance exudes from the greatest of roses, that of freedom. This bouquet, like that of humanity, has been lost to us for quite some time now. The garden in which the roses of freedom once grew has long been overgrown with the rank weeds of oppression, injustice, impoverishment, and psychic incarceration. As the end date of 2012 approaches, our chances may look bleak for most, for those who only see the gutter that they inhabit. But the future is what one makes it. The future is in our hands, as too will be the deathless rose of freedom, once we understand that it is not going to be planted, grown, or given by anyone or anything other than ourselves. The rose of freedom grows in the soil of intelligence and is brought forth with patience, attention, and love. Its fragrance is all the more precious because we know that it is the gift that we have given to ourselves. As Oscar Wilde implied, we can, from the gutters we inhabit, keep in alignment with the stars, those exalted embodiments of freedom and wisdom, those magical white cities in the perfumed wilderness of the night, those jewels in the shimmering sable vestment of the sky queen Nuth. Those who have from this earth observatory really paid attention to the miracles above their heads and to those all about them know that the men and women who crave and abuse wealth, beauty, sexuality, intelligence, or power are not truly powerful and know nothing of the true magic of life. Such observers eventually realize that true magic is not even the action or operation of a hyperactive mind over inert matter, but quite the reverse. For the fact is that though every glass of water we drink is changed by our drinking, we are also, in that same instant, changed forever by that simple act. As I mentioned in the introduction of this program, it is presumptuous and wholly erroneous for us to imagine that the humanism that was the reality in the previous golden ages is in effect in our times. Though it certainly exists as a vivid reality within certain exceptional individuals, it is the most definitely not in evidence in the collective ambiance. However, the philosopher's cardinal purpose is to make the world ready for that rebirthing of the great and sublime humanism. Though it may not be now, the time will come for it to return, to come again from the dark place to which it was banished, back into the light of men's hearts and minds, back into the streets of the world. Despite all the resistance, manipulation, and malign artifice, and despite the cold vigilance of the all-seeing eye of the adversary, its countenance will, one day, shine amongst us again. The rebirth of humanity will be more resplendent than the rising of the sun itself on the equinox of the world. And when we finally gaze again upon its bright visage and bathe in its warmth, it will be time to remember those masters who labored like Hephaestus in the deep lightless places, seeking to free us from the dark satanic mills which now flourish. It will be time to wonder at the labors of such beings, those endowed with a humanism which would shame Prometheus himself. Though in their time, their endowments may sometimes seem more like a curse than a blessing to them, they will ultimately prove their own reward. Their work of sparking in us remembrance and curiosity will one day become the conflagration of joy in the eyes of each as they stand and witness the triumphant return of a mighty, majestic, and everlasting humanity. Though the life of today's everyman is defined by forgetfulness of being and obliviousness of the miracle of existence, the time will inevitably come again for the alternative kind of life, one in which man and nature are again blissfully wedded. The ancient Egyptians symbolized this by the figurative love embrace between their sky goddess Nuth and her consort, the earth god Jeb, and the Hindu sages with the image of Shiva and Shakti in ecstatic unification. The alchemists of later ages also pursued the state of final biunity that they named the Hieros Gamos, or chemical wedding. This strange, inexplicable state of nucleated consciousness is the ultimate goal of all religion, magic, yoga, and science. The great Gnostics, alchemists, and magicians knew, however, that such a state would remain elusive to any seeker until he or she had first experienced what might be described as a chemical divorce. That is, a separation from all that is fallacious and unsustainable, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. This divorce is commensurate with the death of ignorance, and if an entity should be fortunate enough to survive its vagaries, they may be deemed ready to move on to their final transcendence. Humanity is presently experiencing such a period of chemical divorce, and going through what the Maya shamans described as the time of reckoning or of revealing, and which the Bible refers to as an apocalypse. If humanity survives the subsequent vagaries of this phase, it may go on forth to its own chemical wedding. The death of personal and collective ignorance may, indeed, lead to the creation of a new Eden, a new Jerusalem. Should such a day come, or should we each personally experience our own true chemical wedding, our guests will be none other than the sun, the moon, and the evening star. There, at our own marriage feast of Cana, will be the 12 disciples and the 72 apostles, the lion and the unicorn, the centaur with his bow, the lady with the scales, the hermit with his lantern, and the Blessed Virgin herself. Yes, there they will all be, in radiant procession, bestowing upon us their ancient music and ethereal blessing.